Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here and Brian over there. Happy 4th of July, Brian.
Yes, shout out to our nation's glorious independence from our tyrannical overlords, so we ourselves could become tyrannical, overlords someday.
King George III, yeah. House of Hanover, I think? I'm not good on my British monarchs, but that's what I think of George, good old George III.
The House of Hanover, is that one of these lines of, reptilians or something?
Well, in British history, right, they think of their leaders as foreigners, as Normans, French, people that speak French, right? That's kind of been the case since William the Conqueror crossed the Channel in the mid-11th century.
They all speak French?
Yeah, for a long time, the French, what happened was the French, in 1066, right, this massive date in history, the Normans were Vikings, right? You got to remember the plan, what's his name, Ragnar Lothbrok and his band of merry cutthroats sailed up the Seine River and sacked Paris, and this kept happening. So the King of France had the great idea to simply hand the mouth of the Seine River, modern Normandy, over to the Vikings. Right? He crowned a Viking Rollo, the Duke of Normandy, and that's why Normandy is called Normandy, because it's populated, or it's the aristocracy, because the king installed Northmen to rule that particular area. And then in 1066, the Northmen, the Normans, William the Conqueror, crossed the Channel and conquered Britain. And so for a while, the aristocracy were all Frenchmen who spoke French, and the peasantry was all English folk who spoke this weird mixture of Germanic and Latin. And that's why you get the words, oftentimes the prepared food has the French name, beef versus the cow or the pig, or pork or mutton versus the lamb. So the fancy prepared dishes all have French names, and the crude and unwashed livestock all have English names. That's part of the reason there.
Well, isn't there something where Queen Elizabeth, or these people are German or something?
Yes, that's it. So during World War I, the current family, the royal family, is the House of Windsor, right? But prior to World War I, they were the House of Saxe-Gottorp. They were German family. And so, yeah, there's that's a common theme in the British Isles. And foreigners, it's run by foreigners.
So how did the Germans seize it from the French, apparently?
Well, there's we're making a distinction between French and German that's really a modern distinction. If you ask someone from Germany whether Charlemagne was German or French, he'll be Karl de Gaulle is German, of course. But if you ask someone who's from France, they'll be like, Charlemagne is French, of course, right? This is before there was a huge distinction. So what you really have to think in terms of, you have to think about Latin civilization in mainland France, and then a whole bunch of Viking, Scandinavian, Germanic blood mixed in there. People who spoke Old Norse. So that's I think that the current family of King Charles III. Is he the third? I think he's King Charles III. I think that's right. King Charles I and II, not that's from the English Civil War. King Charles's family, I think, is a more recent German family. So you can find old photographs of Queen Victoria's family, right? And the Tsar of Russia and the Kaiser Wilhelm, Tsar Nicholas, Kaiser Wilhelm, Queen Victoria. These people are all in the same family, right? So it's one big family rules all of your, and we talk a lot about structures of power over and above nominal heads of state. Well, this is a really good line of sight into that.
And the Tsar of Russia is one of these people.
Yeah, Tsar Nicholas. They called him Cousin Nicky. That's what the children of Queen and Victoria called him, because they were all related, of course.
Right.
Yeah, there's all the same crazy families ruling over us. Well, I didn't mean to get into the weeds quite so early, Brian. This was all just by way of wishing you a happy 4th of July. That got us into the family of George III. But let's rewind the tape a little bit. When last we spun on this podcast, you were on your way to New York for a Kung Fu event. Not a tournament, right? Not a class. So what happened? How was Brooklyn?
Well, it's like a seminar.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And what you do is about 20 hours of Kung Fu in about 36 hours.
Ooh, okay. That sounds like a lot.
So it's a pretty grueling ordeal. I guess I haven't been to Brooklyn too much before. I think maybe I stopped there once, but it's got the overhead subway, and it's just allows you with people Like one thing is that prices are cheaper in Brooklyn. I mean, the rent's probably more expensive, but haircuts are like $25 down there. There's all kinds of places that'll cut your hair for $25, and up here in Portland, it starts at like $35.
Yeah. Do you remember when we went to La Casa in Hoboken?
Yes.
Yeah, that Cuban restaurant. It's like $30 and you get a huge bag of food there. It is like extremely cheap and extremely good. We really have the absolute worst of all worlds up here in Portland, Maine. All of the food is hideously overpriced. Yeah, the cost of living is through the roof. Rents are out of control, as we'll be talking about much more later in the show. And there's no jobs to pay for all this, so it's just absolutely getting it coming and going up here in Maine.
Yeah.
I spent some good times in Brooklyn. Tracy, one of Tracy's friends, Kate lives out there. We visit her every once in a while. Never failed to have a good time in New York City. That is a great town. Whether you're in Hoboken, whether you're in Manhattan, or whether you're across the bridge in Queens and Brooklyn, it's off the chain.
Yeah, there's kind of just stuff everywhere. So we got there maybe at like 6:30 or 7 or so, go to the hotel and maybe then make our way to the Kung Fu studio. And then, we did Kung Fu till like 1 o'clock. And then we were kind of out on the town a little bit. We were probably up till like 3 or so. But there's just kind of like stuff everywhere. And there's just like people everywhere. People are like hammered drunk. I don't know, like lots of like young people and just like a lot of people and just like everywhere. And there's not like, there's like about as many homeless people up here in Portland. And I don't know. It was pretty cool. It was a cool place to be. It was like a lot of hard work doing Kung Fu for 20 hours. It's definitely like, you just have to do Kung Fu for 20 hours to know what it's like.
No way to handicap it or guess what it might be like extrapolate from other experiences, or you would just have to do 20 hours of Kung Fu.
Well, I guess
possibly grok this.
What I could, after the end of the second day, I was terribly sore and ill-tempered. But I guess the point is they want to break you down a bit. And then on the last day, we did like a workout wherein I felt pretty good. I don't know what I guess when you're doing lots of Kung Fu, I don't know, Zins can help you get through a crazy amount of Kung Fu. Although I came back and you're supposed to go to your regular Kung Fu class and show what you've learned when you got back. And we got back like late on Sunday, so I had to go to work on Monday and then go to Kung Fu and try to, muster my coordination. And so I popped a Zin and I felt terrible in class.
Oh man. Yeah. A Zin. I mean, that's just terrible for any kind of, exercise or cardiovascular activity. I just feel like, that is a terrible, it sounds like a terrible combination to me.
Well, at the end of the day, Saturday, I popped his in, and then I felt like a lot better about the whole thing. It's sort of like, I was able to, regain some, I was able to like marshal my senses or something.
When you were ill-tempered, were you cursing your own stupidity for having signed up for this godforsaken voyage to Brooklyn?
Basically. the whole Kung Fu enterprise in general. And then on Sunday, like we just did like this. What they do is they turned off the AC and
thanks a lot. Really appreciate that.
Well, it's good. That's how they do it in China. I guess they don't have AC, back in the day. So yeah, we did like this 2-hour workout, and the room was like just covered in sweat. But I actually felt like crazily good during that workout. But I think I popped his in then also. But
the Zen magic didn't work for you on Monday, huh?
No. So I think there's something about extraordinary circumstances where a little Zen is like just the thing. But I don't know. Regular circumstances, not so much.
Yeah. They just make me feel like I don't have my. I mean, it's like a Zen is it's not a major change to your consciousness. It's just a little. It just makes me feel like I don't have my usual force of personality, or like I don't inhabit my body as hard as I usually do, and I just like to be intense, and I don't know. It just hasn't... exercise, man, that's just one magisteria where I would steer clear of the Zins. But I'm glad it worked out for you, at least where you were in the throes of torment down there in Brooklyn, suffering through hour number 17.
Yeah.
Kung Fu. Well, we've had some exciting developments on Reddit, Brian, on the old system failure subreddit. To all those within the sound of my voice, you can head over to reddit.com/r/system failure and check out the burgeoning community we've got there, eh?
Yeah, well, you were telling me we're in the top 20% or so of subreddits. So you could join a top 20% subreddit.
Yeah. Hit up systemfailure.org. You can post whatever you want there. I just post the two podcasts and the weekly essay there and get involved in the comments. There's some funny memes. It's starting to actually pick up steam and be an actual community with a couple thousand members, and so we'll keep building that up. So that's a pretty exciting development. It is fun that you and I are the sole mods of a top 20 subreddit, and there's no other mods on the mod team to cause a democratic situation where we have to compromise with them. So we have complete and iron-fisted control over this top 20 subreddit. Not that there are any. I don't really intend to run the thing with it. I'd like to not spend hours dealing with mod mail and other things like that. So if we could I just want to be able to post our content there and see what people think.
I wonder how big the subreddit has to get before, we get brigaded and shilled and, I don't know, it becomes like the Joe Rogan subreddit where everyone in the subreddit hates Joe Rogan.
Well, that's fine with me. If everyone wants to pile in and mock our podcast every week, that would be awesome. I would think that would be great. Like we would be like there's no such thing as bad press. So I don't know if people want to pan us. I'm down for that.
They're gonna be like, I can't believe they talked about socialism again on the System Failure podcast.
Well, that commenter is in for a massive disappointment because guess what we'll be talking about in the second half of this show? None other than socialism itself. But yeah, that's a really cool development. I am excited I'm excited that you and I, are the sole mods on this top 20. Then we'll try to push it into the top 1% as the year wears on here. That will be fun. And I do think, we've had 1,200 new subscribers in the past couple days. I figure, 1,000 of those have got to be bots, right? The level of bot infiltration on Reddit is legendary. I got to think the vast majority of these people are, but it's still a couple hundred real people that might, that would still be lurking in there. So,
well, hopefully that bot algorithm will upvote, our podcast posts.
Yeah, well, it has been working so far, and so hopefully we'll see a lot more of that in the coming week or so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I suppose with all of the preamble out the way, that we should dive into the main event for the main theme of this week's podcast, and that is, of course, what's on everyone's lips, but the nomination of a certain Zoran Mamdani down in the New York City mayoral race. Pretty exciting stuff there, eh, Brian?
Yeah. There's some hoopla and circumstance surrounding it. So, exciting for some, less exciting for others.
Well, it's really the less exciting part that's funny to me. The way that people react to someone winning the popular vote, with people, voting their own economic interests instead of being convinced to vote for some other class's economic interest, it just terrifies the upper class. And the Wall Street Journal exploded with editorials, one of which I have to read here. And in the second half of the show, we'll have Mr. Tom Bilyeu, beloved podcaster. Unfortunately, we're going to have to be hard on him today because he has embarrassed himself in response to the nomination of Mamdani. We got a few clips on that front to play. But I suppose the first thing to do here, Brian, is to dive right into this Wall Street Journal piece. I chose this editorial of many editorials about the wrong thinking of socialism because there were some interesting comments about Portland, Maine in the comment section. So I'll read those when we get to the bottom, and you tell me if you think that these comments at all encapsulate what's been going on in our fair city here up in Portland.
Okay.
But let's just hear what Mr. Greg Ip thinks of Mamdani and his socialist agenda. Here is his editorial from this past week in the Wall Street Journal, and this editorial is entitled, "New Yorkers Vote to Make Their Housing Shortage Worse." I just love the title already. It's great. And this piece is subtitled, "Austin, Texas, and other red state cities have set an example for how to make housing markets work." Again, this is a story by Mr. Greg Ip in the June 26th Wall Street Journal. Here are some choice excerpts. Back in 2022, Austin, Texas, had a mayoral election that bore a superficial resemblance to New York City's this week. The final runoff featured 2 Democrats, one an establishment candidate and former mayor, the other a lesser-known progressive. The main issue was a housing shortage that had sent home prices and rents soaring. There, the similarities end. This is the similarities between New York and Austin. Despite different backgrounds, the 2 candidates had the same approach to housing: make it easier to build. Neither proposed freezing rent, as Zoran Mamdani, a self-described Democratic socialist and presumed winner of this week's Democratic mayoral primary in New York. Texas generally prohibits rent control. The results? Since 2022, prices and rents are down sharply in Austin. Not pleasant if you bought a house or broke ground on an apartment building at the peak, but for Austin, it's a very good thing. Falling home prices are a sign of a functioning, self-equilibrating market. A surge in demand raised prices, which led to more supply and eventually cooling prices and rents. There is nothing self-equilibrating about New York's housing market. Supply has been stubbornly unresponsive to steadily rising prices and rents. Should Mamdani go on to win the general election, sticking to his adversarial approach to landlords and private developers won't fix this. Consider this. Since February 2020, payroll employment is up a whopping 20% in the Austin metro area versus just 3% in New York City. Yet since then, housing prices have actually risen more in New York by 48% than in Austin by 44%. Austin's rents at one point were rising 23% a year, but have since plummeted and now stand just 11% higher than in early 2020, according to RealPage, which serves the apartment industry, while New York's are 20% higher. The reason, as you might have guessed, is supply. Between 2020 and 2024, total housing units rose 17% in Austin, but just 3% in New York, according to census data. New York's housing supply is, quote, heavily regulated and totally dependent on complicated pieces of legislation, says Eric Kober, a former director of housing planning for the city's planning department, who is now at the conservative Manhattan Institute. Quote, sophisticated developers figure out how to make money, not by being great capitalists, but by playing the angles of these different laws, unquote. As Kober explains, zoning changes in the 1960s made it harder for supply to respond dynamically to rising demand. Idiosyncratic regulations, such as those on the use of stationary cranes and liability for accidents, raise construction costs. Rent control, or rent stabilization, now covering roughly half the city's units, discourages tenants from moving and landlords from upgrading the quality of units. Kober says Mamdani's rent freeze would make that worse. After a 2019 state law tightened conditions for rent increases, vacancy rates plummeted, he notes. A law last year championed by Mayor Eric Adams did lift some restrictions on building and renovation, but also raised the bar for evictions from even unregulated units. New York has generally sought to boost supply via subsidies and tax inducements. Mamdani has proposed publicly subsidizing 200,000 more affordable units. But even if he had the funding, such units typically cost far more than their purely private equivalents, in part because all the attached conditions, such as using unionized labor. There are limits to what Mayor Mamdani can do. He can only freeze rents on existing rent-stabilized units. He can be overruled by the New York State legislature, and during the campaign, he did soften his stance toward private developers. Yet, any developer contemplating a new project must consider the risk that a Democratic socialist mayor will seek to rein in its returns. That's not good for supply. And of course, there's also the demand side. Mamdani's promise to raise taxes on the rich and corporations has raised fears he might drive jobs out of the city, which would at least ease housing demand. All right, well, that's it from the article. I mean, you get the point there. The man wants to compare Austin to New York City, but haven't you heard, Brian, that a lot of people are leaving Austin as a result of, return to work mandates and other things like that? Like there was a huge influx into Austin at the beginning of COVID and out of places like New York City, and then a return to places like New York City and a big outflux out of Austin. That's what I've heard.
I guess I hadn't heard that very much, although I've kind of seen the tide turn on Austin a bit where
Yes.
more people are saying the city sucks.
I just briefly searched for this, and you can find in the Austin subreddit people saying there's tons of for sale signs and just general chatter that's more anecdotal than real data.
Well, it seems like it was kind of blowing up, at least Joe Rogan having something to do with it. And that's like cooled off.
And Musk moved Tesla out there from Fremont, California, out to Austin too. So that happened. But I think that a lot of work from home type folks also descended on Austin, and then that work from home, the bosses are all wanting the bosses. There's no point in having an army of workers if you can't, observe the army of workers working, right? So they just want those people back in the office. And also they got these leases, giant leases on these these office buildings. That's another reason they want people back and work, kind of justify that expense. But
well, how do we get people to leave Portland and get the rents to go down here?
That, of course, is the great question. Is the solution, as suggested by Mr. Ip in that editorial, is the problem that we have too many zoning, it's just too much bureaucratic red tape to cut through before you can build, and that jacks up the cost of construction and disincentivizes potential developers from building units? I don't find that to be at all a satisfying explanation for the phenomenon to which we are witnessing here. Do you remember last year when we had that article from the United Way pointing out that there are 28 vacant homes for every homeless individual in this country?
I do.
28 homes to each single homeless individual, right? The problem we have is the way that we distribute housing, right? We've got 28 homes for every person on the street. The problem is that if you suppose some private developers built a huge amount of housing here in Portland, right? Would that depress the cost of housing? Maybe a little bit, but all of those structures would be bought by people who already own houses, right? Because in order to get the loan to buy the new developments, you have to have a little bit of collateral to promise the bank. So if you already have a house that you can take out a second mortgage on, or that you can pledge as collateral on the loan, if you're already a slumlord, or you already have a bunch of properties, right? It's much easier to get more because the bank can use your existing properties as collateral. The system we have will distribute the vast bulk of new housing to people that already have housing, and that's how we end up with jacking up rents. It's like we have a fundamental distribution problem, but you will not find a word about that in Wall Street Journal. I also just wanted to get to the comments here, Brian, because we had this. We had Victoria Geibel chiming in the comments on the exact editorial that I just summarized for you. And you tell me if you think that this matches your memory of what happened here in Portland. In 2020, Portland, Maine instituted rent control. In the few years before that, young progressives from D.C. and New York City had moved up to the small city of 60,000 en masse and taken over the local politics. Well, guess what happened? Landlords took their rentals off the market and converted them to condos. Wealthy retirees and out-of-staters swept in and scooped up the condos for top dollar. The result, the housing crisis is worse than before. Restaurants are closing because staff cannot afford to live in the city. Now Portland is a Disney-fied version of its former self, with sky-high housing costs, rampant homelessness, congested parking, and property taxes going through the roof. Okay. Now, Victoria, just as someone who went door to door with DSA in 2016 campaigning for this rent control, this rent control was a response to the impetus to pass rent control was a response to out of control rent prices, right? It was not. She's got her cart before her horse. It's bizarre to read, right? I just was somewhat party to DSA when this whole rent control thing was cooking, and it's funny that she places the rent control as the cause of exploding rents instead of the exploding rents as the cause of rent control.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like the Portland rent control. I mean, it's like crazily expensive to rent an apartment in Portland.
Yeah.
Anyway,
our rents substantially different here in the peninsula where there is rent control, or in South Portland versus like in South Portland, or like, I mean, no, it's exactly the same problem in South Portland.
I mean, I guess what I'd say happened in Portland is that COVID happened, which caused an influx of work from home workers from other states with high paying jobs And then COVID did this thing where it gutted the economy, basically. And then also it's become like a cruise ship stop. And it's just what's profitable is to market to really rich people. And then there's kind of an underbelly of service workers and other people who live at, I forget the name of this crazy apartment building next door.
The Trelawney Building.
Yeah, that's who I guess have to live there and work, be the wait staff at the lesser restaurants. And so I don't.
It's just so obvious to me that rent control was a desperate and obviously rents are still out of control in Portland. People, the rent board has, no real teeth. There's the tenant board or whatever, the tenant union, whatever they are, they have no real ability. We put limits on short-term rentals, and you're supposed to register your short-term rentals with the city, and short-term rental people just don't do it. There's no enforcement. There's no nothing. DSA has been able to change nothing about what's going on in Portland here, and you can just tell because across the bridge in South Portland, it's the exact same scenario. The rents are out of control. Cape Elizabeth, rents are out of control. It's just Scarborough, rents are out of control. So it's just so obvious that this person is just badly misplaced.
So her hypothesis was that people voted for socialists and they applied rent control, and that's why rent's out of.
That's it. To hear Victoria Guy Bell say it, all the rent problems are a result of the DSA and the rent control provision that they put in here. It's just ridiculous. I mean, the rent control just really has not substantively changed the situation at all. That would be what I'm seeing from my end. And furthermore, the exploding rents and and all of that, well predate 2020. I think obviously, rent control is people's reaction to the landlords harvesting all of us and chasing all the young people out of the city. Right? It's not rent control is just it's a failed response to that. It is not the cause of it, as our friend Victoria is wont to write here.
Well, to be charitable towards people who are angry about socialism and Mayor Zoran, whatever the last name is, rent control. I mean, if you really freeze rents, with the rent control here in Portland, caps the amount of rent they're able to raise each year. But anyway, if you actually just freeze the cost of rent, I can see this problem where you're going to have an excess of demand for a limit, because if the prices are low, there'll be a lot more demand, right? And so there's just going to not be enough housing. But the issue is probably BlackRock buying up all the single-family homes and whatnot, just these large entities owning the housing, like you were saying there before,
and using rent software like RealPage and Yardi that it use. And it's kind of like the insurance we were talking about last week, and it's there's all this public data, and Yardi and RealPage talk to allow renters to collude on price fixing across the city, which is absolutely brutal. So we'll dive much more into the housing talk in the second half of the show when we hear from our friend Tom Bilyeu over at the Impact Theory podcast. But there's two more comments here. Captain Smith chimed in to say, "I'm just thankful I lived next door in Westbrook, once considered a stinky mill town. The best way to ruin a city is a nuclear bomb. Portland has chosen the second best way, rent control." Yeah, that's right. It's like we nuked our city in 2020. Look around. Oh, wait. It doesn't seem... all right. We are fortunate the state did not elect to pass rent control in the Senate this session. Nice and accurate analysis, Victoria. Victoria responds, "As you well know, as rents have risen in Portland, people in the city have moved to nearby suburbs, and Westbrook is now considered a very desirable, hip, and happening place with rising rents." The same is true in Biddeford. It's just yes.
Yeah, those places are out of control, expensive to live. Westbrook is not much better.
I feel like these are people that maybe live in Florida or have a summer home in Maine. They just have their finger is not on the pulse here.
They sound like old people.
One last note from Victoria. The other issue in Portland, which is a contentious one, is the conversion of private properties, be they freestanding houses or apartment condos or one unit in a triple-decker, to Airbnbs. Property owners say it is the only way they can afford rising property taxes. Even Victoria had to put some parentheses here and say, though the profit incentive is most likely at work. Other owners of nearby properties say the proliferation of Airbnbs is contributing to crime and the deterioration of neighborhood upkeep. One thing is for sure, the growing number of Airbnbs further reduces the amount of available long-term rental housing. Yeah, I can't disagree with Victoria too much there. I do think that the profit motive is why people are converting to Airbnbs, not because they have to cover these monumental property tax bills, right? The property tax bills, again, they're downstream of higher property valuations, and the higher property valuations are downstream of a system of credit that is, destroying this country. It's just another example of how that's happening. So interesting to see our little neck of the woods mentioned in the Wall Street Journal section, even if it was by the catastrophically mistaken Victoria Guy Bell. All right, well, I suppose, Brian, we ought to take ourselves a short break, and then we'll come right back, and we have got the always exciting Tom Bilyeu's commentary on the nomination of Mr. Mamdani.
All right.
And we're back. All right, well, as promised in the first half of the show, we've got the loquacious Mr. Tom Bilyeu, who runs the Impact Theory podcast. And boy, was Tom Bilyeu's smokestack, billowing after at the notion of socialist politics. So in this first clip, we're going to kind of set, his assistant will play some actual ads from the Mamdani campaign, and you'll hear Tom Bilyeu starting to get ratcheted up here, which is very entertaining. So, Brian, if you could you take it away with clip number 1?
Well, New York will have to decide what kind of city they have, because there's a new mayor candidate that is making waves.
Gotham alert. This is nuts.
No context. Let's jump into his policies, because Tom has thoughts.
Grocery prices are out of control. The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some stores are even using dynamic pricing, jacking up the cost over the course of a day depending on what they can get away with. It doesn't need to be this way. I'm Zoran Mamdani, and as mayor, I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce. We will redirect city funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, whose mission is lower prices, not price gouging. These stores will operate without a profit motive or having to pay property taxes or rent.
And then he also had a way to revolutionize transportation.
Our campaign is surging, and you want to know why? Because the ideas we're fighting for are popular. This month, for example, we got new...
The ideas that you're fighting for are popular because people do not understand the actual cause and effect that is going on here. Anyway, let's keep playing him, because you're right. Boy, do I have thoughts. I have all the thoughts here. When I start grabbing the microphone, we're in trouble.
Support city-owned grocery stores, a policy we've championed for months that would guarantee cheaper groceries. But that's not all. A separate poll found 3/4 of New Yorkers support making buses free, like this one. As a state legislator, I won $15 million to fund a first-of-its-kind fare-free bus pilot that led to a 30% increase.
In my deep dive on how all of this plays out, one of the things I said was, people get elected by promising things for free. Like, I cannot believe how cliche this is. He's literally just listing, I'm going to lower this price through tax dollars, not by improving the system. We're going to allocate tax dollars to it. Bro, that's so crazy. This is so crazy. He's just promising you, hey, everybody in the high school, welcome to New York High. The vending machines are going to be free, everybody.
Vote me for class president.
This is nuts. This is nuts precisely because it's popular. This is nuts precisely because I know there are going to be people that are annoyed that I think this is crazy.
Okay. Well, you've heard it from the man himself, Brian. Allocating tax dollars towards infrastructure is nuts. It's crazy, and definitely not something that we do on a regular basis, and also not not a crucial function in every modern society is spending tax dollars on infrastructure, right? It's like lighthouses and things like lighthouses and bridges, right? Like a lighthouse, it's just really hard to charge the individual ships for the services a lighthouse provides, so it makes sense to use public funds to build the lighthouse, right? Just sometimes the profit motive, sometimes the market model just doesn't apply to the good or service that we're trying. The market model does not apply well to a critical good or service. like lighthouses is a good example, or bridges. I would argue hospitals too. Right? You cannot compare providers when you're in in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. That's what makes healthcare a remarkably. It admits the market is a very poor model, on which to run healthcare. But I wanted to focus on Tom's quote here. People get elected by promising things for free. Have you heard the famous quote by Ben Franklin, Brian, that goes, when people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic? There's a similar quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, who was the Frenchman who came to America in 1831 and toured the new nation and wrote this book about American democracy. And de Tocqueville had this quote: "The American Republic will endure until the day Congress discovers it can bribe the public with the public's money." Heard these quotes before?
I guess I don't know that I have, but okay.
They're usually trotted out to condemn spending on like welfare programs, right? Oh man, when people find out they can vote themselves, this is what Tom Bilyeu's saying. It's like the free vending machine in the high school and the run for class president. But I don't know. I do agree. It's like the disaster when people find out they can vote themselves money. But when you look at the composition of the economy, is it the case that workers are getting really filthy rich off the backs of poor, hardworking entrepreneurs? Or are the workers getting hammered with and having their wealth slowly absconded with year after year after year? It's like when you talk about voting yourself money, that to me does not describe like welfare queens. That to me describes the Reagan administration in the 1980s. We remember when the top marginal tax rate was 70% in 1980. By 1988, the top marginal tax rate was 28%, right? During the Reagan administration, in other words, rich people voted themselves free money from the government, right? They shifted the tax burden onto the rest of us.
Well, that's different.
Oh yeah, that's totally different too. But that is what will destroy the country, right? But it's not the poor worker who's just trying to make rent at the end of the month, right? It's the people. It's like it's the people. It's the already wealthy who are awarding themselves more and more and more of our national output to the detriment of our entire society. So I got a lot more to say on this, but I think we should roll into quote number 2 here, Brian, in which Mr. Bilyeu will acknowledge that we do have a broken system.
We have a broken system. We have to get rid of the inequality. We have to educate people. We have to make sure that being born in the inner cities is not a death trap. Like where you're stuck there forever and ever. Those are musts. So I am on anybody's team who wants to see that kind of stuff happen. But this is where I really, really beg people to be a student of history and of the things you're learning about, to map cause and effect. When you start looking at countries that have tried socialism and communism, it's basically the same thing. You very quickly realize why, from a cause and effect perspective, it doesn't work. And if I can say it in a single sentence, the reason that socialism doesn't work is people won't work for free. The second you, dear listener, will work for free, socialism will work. But the reality is you don't want to work for free. And you certainly don't want to work at a job that the government picks for free. And that's what you have to do to make the system work. So when you're in a system that's producing all these incredible goods because you have thriving entrepreneurs, people actually lose sight of the fact it is obscenely difficult to create a company, and I'll call it an economic machine. It's extremely difficult to create an economic machine where the inputs, the people and the money, the ingredients, the raw parts, whatever, that you put into it, output something that people will willingly pay more for because it's more valuable to them than it cost you to make it. That's ridiculously hard. And almost without exception, the number one line item for any entrepreneur is labor. It's the people. So once you realize, oh, I'm the problem, I'm the reason that socialism won't work because I insist on getting paid. And people have a vision in their head that they're not going to have to work, that they're going to get everything for free. You're not. You'll coast on fumes for a little bit as you break all the makers in society. So all the people that have been able to do that, they will just say, I'm not going to do it because you're confiscating my wealth. You're taking everything away from me that I'm making. It's way too hard. It's way too stressful. And so why would I do that if the outcome is I get very little and we get, I mean, basically what they ended up having in Russia. You think it's going to be amazing grocery stores and cheap prices. It's not, because it's just such a wildly inefficient system. And people don't recognize that the rebound effect of trying to control prices at the store level means the farmer goes, I'm just not going to make these things anymore because you won't let me charge enough to make it worth my while.
Well, I guess it seems excessive to suggest that having like free buses in New York is gonna have farmers stop making food.
Yeah, you think? Yeah, that's pretty funny, Brian. All right, couple of my reactions here. Obviously, Tom Bilyeu recognized we have a terrible problem. He won't be offering any solutions to these problems. He'll just be shooting down this solution. So just note that. I love this bit where Tom's like, "Be a student of history." And then a few minutes later, he's like, well, socialism and communism basically the same thing. It's like, dang, dude, want to talk about being a student. Maybe you should actually crack a book by someone who is, rather than being critical of Marxism, is a proponent of it. You wouldn't want to only read proponents of Marxism, something that I've been guilty of. You want a balanced view, you're going to have to actually crack some books. And suggesting that socialism and communism are exactly the same does not make it seem like you've cracked too many books in your time. Tom's an entrepreneur. I can understand why he has an emotional reaction to this problem, to this idea of electing a socialist. He's one of these hard scrabble entrepreneurs who's creating companies out of nothing, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. But we do have an epidemic of freeloaders in this country, and again, it's not the welfare people. It's those people who shuffle down the end of their driveway in their slippers and their robe, and collect a check from their mailbox and shuffle, and that's their contribution to society because they own equity in one of these massive corporations. I'm thinking of like the Walton family down in Arkansas. Like these people inherited the whole Walmart empire from their old man, and now they have this massive amount of control. And I'm just looking at that and going yep, those people are freeload. They didn't build, they themselves, they're not the ones that created Walmart. They merely inherited it. And the idea of hereditary power is exactly the thing that we're supposed to be opposed to in America on the 4th of July with respect to good old King George III, Brian? Yeah. Working for free. So the issue within the capitalist system is that your employer is guaranteed. He will not be your employer for long if he pays you more than the value of your output, right? Your employer must pay you less than the value of your output in order for his firm to be profitable, right? So what we have here is not a system in the Marxist critique is the noticing is to notice that what we have is a system of exploitation, an undemocratic system in which a minority are permitted top-down control over these systems of production and distribution. And the Marxist suggestion is that bringing those apparatus of production and distribution under democratic control is the obvious next phase of the great project of human civilization. And I just don't see Tom Bilyeu he just has listened to the anti-Marxist propaganda and is now parroting that back to us. The last thing I would just say about Mr. Tom Bilyeu and his entrepreneurship is I really like that Jeremy Corbyn idea where when Tom Bilyeu goes to sell his company, well, now he must offer to his employees first. And that way we preserve the efforts of a hard scrabble entrepreneur like Tom Bilyeu, and we still have that dynamic in our society, but we don't have the dynamic where the Walton family is just totally dominating the lives of hundreds of thousands of employees and customers. And so you can just see where I can see where why he would have an emotional reaction to this. But the condescension, you must be educated. I mean, it's just dude, you haven't cracked a single book. In short, Brian, this is my absolute worst nightmare to be like Tom here, to be speaking into the microphone and having the people on the other end be like, well, there's obvious counter arguments. Are you going to take on none of those? Are you just going to shout that, socialism equals communism? And I know this because of my education. It's my worst nightmare is for listeners to this show to hear me speak like Tom does and just be like, yeah, so we're just not going to at all take on any of the popular counter arguments to these positions. It's not as if this hasn't been thought of. It's not as if there's not an other side to the debate. Okay, so maybe, Brian, we could move on to clip number 3. I think it's about time.
The freezing the rents, what ends up happening, if you want to create slums, freeze rents. Because what ends up happening, owning a property is extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. Doing all the upkeep and all that. And part of the joy of renting is you don't have to worry about any of that. You don't have to worry about property taxes, but the government can't cut the property tax because this guy's giving everything away for free. If anything, they're going to have to raise property taxes to keep those taxes flowing. So now I'm a landlord. I hear this. I'm not buying any new properties. That's for sure. I guarantee anybody that was thinking about doing something when they saw this guy spike in the polls, they're like, I'm going to wait and see how this plays out. I've done the exact thing in LA. So from experience, I will tell you, you start hearing politicians make crazy noises and you start going, whoa, okay, I'm not going to invest further because I need to see how this is going to play out. So the reason that they're going to become slums is they've got to keep paying their property tax, which may go up. They can't raise the rents, even if their costs go up. The cost of fixtures, let's say, goes up. The cost of a plumber goes up, but the cost of rents can't go up with it. So now what does the landlord start doing? They fix as little as humanly possible because otherwise they're getting eaten. If they start getting into the red, then they're just going to give up the property or they're going to try to sell it as fast as they can. And so now when people are selling distressed, property values are going down. The property value is clocked on the last sale, presumably if it's anything like California, which I assume it is. So that means that by freezing the rents, you start driving the values of the properties down, which means that they're collecting less rent, which means fewer and fewer people want to do any kind of investment inside of New York. And so now things just sort of start falling into disrepair. And by the way, nobody wants to move out of their apartment because they've got a fixed rent. And so it's not like, oh, there's suddenly a huge influx of people until things start getting really bad and people start fleeing the city. Then economically, the city just stops being viable and you end up with Detroit. And so if you want to see New York of the 70s where people are being raped and killed in Central Park, okay, like this is the path that we want to go down.
Raped and killed, Brian. You heard it from Tom Bilyeu first. If we freeze the profitability of these landlords, not I'm talking about eliminating their profitability, they just can only have the amount of profit they're currently making. Well, then rape and death is the inevitable outcome, of course, obviously. Well, there's that book by Thomas Piketty called Capital, and the big thrust from that book was that there are two numbers that are important in society. There's the rate of investment return, and then there's the rate of economic growth. And if the rate of investment return is greater than the rate of economic growth, that is to say, if our apple pie is growing slower than the rate of the investing class, like if the wealthy investing class is growing faster than the overall pie, right? If their slices are increasing at a faster rate than the pie is increasing, then they get their wealth at our expense. The investing class gets, from the working class, sucks up all that wealth. And like obviously, if you tax 100% of people's wealth, that's going to cause a problem, right? There's clearly a ditch on one side of the road here, where if you jack up taxes too much, you'll just stifle the economy. There'll be no private sector, and that will be a disaster, right? But there's also a ditch on the other side of the road, and that's the one that so often we crash into, historically speaking, and that's where you just let the rich just soak the working class until you end up with an unsustainable society and end up with revolution and dysfunction and violence and all of that stuff. We've got to steer our car down the middle of the road. We need a balance between soaking. We can't just soak the investing class infinitely, obviously, but you can't just soak the working class either. And we are talking about a minor adjustment of the steering wheel here. We're just talking about freezing the rents, freezing the profitability of this of the landlord investors just for now. We're talking about a slight correction of the steering wheel, and this man is talking about rape and death. It's absolutely crazy. And I suppose. Well, if you were going to actually propose a solution to this problem, right, what you would want to do is you wouldn't even have to go to socialism. The idea of taxing the wealthy to reseed the money that the wealthy are hoarding back into the economy where it can circulate, right? That idea is a stopgap measure it's like a bandage slapped on a fundamentally broken system, as pointed out by Mr. Bilyeu there. But if you wanted to solve the situation, right, you wouldn't even go to socialism, right? That is a stopgap. You would just go to the proto-capitalists, right? What was their idea? Their idea was to cut out the feudal landlords by taxing, production, and then using those funds to provide housing and healthcare and food at economies of scale to drastically decrease the overhead of production, right? Because when the old feudal landlords charged a rent to the workers that would go to the factories of central England and work every day, well, then the owner of that factory, a guy like Engels, Marx's buddy, he has to pay his workers enough to cover the rents that the medieval landlords are jacking up. And so in the foundational text of capitalism, the call is for free markets, free meaning free from rent extraction, not free from regulation. That change came in the late 1800s and is the source of, it was a topic in our discussion with Dr. Michael Hudson last year. So like what you, again, like at another point in this video, Tom Bilyeu is praising Singapore, right? Apparently not having cracked a book and realized that 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing, right? So the solution to this problem is it's not socialism. You would just tax the rich and then use that to create massive amounts of public housing, and then that would, of course, destroy the investments of these landlords. Their slums and their tenements would no longer be profitable. Everyone would move out of there. They would have to sell at fire sale prices. All right, it's what the Chinese do. They build the city before they have the population problem. Right, they have all those empty cities. Like they don't do things like we do, where we just let people rot on the streets and then wonder why they're lapsed into mental disorders and into irregular mental health. So yeah, I don't know. I just can't believe how bad poor Tom's analysis is. Love Tom. I really don't want to rag on him, more than is necessary. But these are some brutal opinions that the man just gets on the camera and just spouts with total confidence as if there's not obvious counter arguments to them already in existence. Any thoughts on that clip, Brian, before we move on?
I don't know. Well, I guess Zoran there, I'll have to. Well, the thing is, Zoran, he's only won the Democratic primary, for the mayoral election. So
well, now he's the presumptive Democratic nominee. The current mayor, Eric Adams, got kicked out of the Democratic Party for horrible ethical violations. Right? I think that's what happened to Mr. Adams, and he's going to even get like the Donald maybe even might have his support, but so the current mayor is going to run as an independent, and there'll be a Republican who never wins, and so. I mean, all things being equal, this should just be a layup for Mamdani to just win the mayoral now. The primaries in a super blue city like New York, being the Democratic nominee is as good as being is as good as winning the election. This is a much harder election to win than the general for him. So that's very interesting. But you can see the people who were screaming blue, vote blue no matter who in 2020. We'll see if they're still voting blue no matter who when it's a socialist who's got the Democratic ticket. This is going to be wild. It's just like and of course Mamdani has a lot to say about Palestine too. So it's the Israel-Palestine issue and now this issue of socialism. It's great to see it destroying the corrupt old apparatus of the Democratic Party.
Right. Well, the candidate they put up was a Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, who got in trouble for being a sex pest and also for sending sick COVID patients back to their nursing homes to infect the entire institutions and establishments, and just being responsible for the death of hundreds of elderly people as a result of that unfortunate policy. So yeah, that's who they trotted. That's who they trotted out to oppose this Mamdani, and of course he mopped the floor with the billionaire-backed Andrew Cuomo the billionaire-backed Cuomo candidacy, and so it's going to be wild to see what happens when in the general later this year, because the Democrats are going to try to do everything they can. It's just like when Bernie is obviously captured the hearts and minds of the Democrats in 2016 and 20. They're going to have to do everything they can to sandbag this dude. I can't wait to see what they're going to have to pull out of their bags of what trick they're going to have to pull out of their bag of tricks, and then how obvious that will make their strategy to everyone. Right, the more they have to fight against these leftist politics, the more the more they're going to be seen in combat against leftist policies that directly benefit the working class. Right. They're trying. You're right. They would love for the working class not to vote for their own economic interests. That's only for rich Republicans who want to vote themselves tax breaks, right? But the Dems are complicit in that whole machine of rich people voting themselves tax breaks, and so they're in a really awkward spot now. And I delight to see it.
All right. Well, I mean, as a politician, I guess it's about threading a needle, and hopefully Zoran can do a good job for the name of democratic socialism. California is a crazy place, and you see those signs, the parking signs that are there's 8 of them explaining the complicated times in which you're allowed to park. And then the wildfires happened, and they're completely unprepared to deal with a wildfire in California, which is absolutely crazy. And they're supposed to be some kind of welfare state or something. So, I mean, obviously, it's about threading a needle. It's hard to imagine that Zoran's gonna, single-handedly destroy the city of New York. So, I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Could it possibly be any worse with runaway rents and people not able to find how? I mean, how bad do you think? I mean, but by slightly curbing the return on investment of this investor class of landlords, are we really going to cause chaos in the streets? It doesn't seem likely. What we need is a more equitable. We need to shift the tax burden back to where it was in like the 50s and 60s and 70s. It's not undo the shifting of the tax burden onto us that was perpetrated in those times, right? That is the core of neoliberal economics, right? Lower taxes on the wealthy, and everyone else will get the trickle-down benefits. It never works. It is a scam. That is an example of people voting themselves money and bamboozling the rest of us.
Yeah, I guess I'm unclear exactly what the problems are in New York in the first place, but in Portland, it's obviously. Well, there's this bifurcation going on, where it's catering to the cruise ship crowd, and it's not accommodating towards a sort of a middle class situation, and so I don't really know what the problem is in New York, but I mean, if we were to put a Cuomo in charge, I just have to imagine his plan would be to cater more to the cruise ship crowd, right?
Drop taxes on the rich. That'll solve all of our economics problems.
Yeah. So I don't. Anyway, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, we got one more clip from Mr. Bilyeu, Brian. Fire it up and let's bring her home.
One thing that I don't know if this problem is solvable, and the following sentence may explain exactly why history loops the way that it does. Mm-hmm. The way the world works is just complicated enough that most people will never take the time to understand it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand it, you'll steer by emotion. Period.
And in this moment, this is just an emotional reaction.
It's just emotion.
I see
the wealthy are getting wealthier. That's unfair. And I'm being crushed by student debt, which is a problem for so many people. And fuck you, I want my peace. And so because they have that emotion of fuck you, I want my peace, and you get guys saying, I'll give you your peace. Why wouldn't I vote for that guy? Yeah. And the only reason you wouldn't vote for that guy is because you actually understand the cause and effect. But most people don't understand the cause and effect, will never understand the cause and effect. And the whole reason that humans have emotions is so that you don't have to understand the cause and effect. You just know that rustle in the bush scares me, so I'm going to turn and run. And so all we know is I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. This guy is telling me, vote for me and you don't have to take it anymore. I'm going to take from whoever it is that I take from, and I'm going to give it to you. Yeah. Yes, please.
Well, there you have it. Mr. Tom Bilyeu, definitely in no way emotional over this at all, is expounding from his lofty perch of intellectual superiority that this is why history loops, that people are just too dumb to understand what's going on. Not like Tom, who has got a keen eye on this problem. But I will say this by way of closing. What is it that defines the trajectory of human history? It is pleonexia, the wealth addiction that Plato wrote about in the 4th century BC. Right? It's like the Roman Empire would have been sustainable except for the wealthy elites of the Roman Empire just couldn't resist just absolutely soaking their working class at every turn. And that is what lent the shape to the history of the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. Later, during the Middle Ages, it was the same with the Roman Catholic Church. They were once the scrappy upstarts during the Roman Empire, the rebels with the radical what the Durants called communism of the apostles, like a radical economic agenda. Eventually calcified into its own moribund authority, the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, and it started fleecing its own people, most famously with the sale of indulgences, where you cut a check to the church to get you out of time in purgatory. And eventually that system collapsed too because of the greed of the nobles, the lords, the feudal lords. And here we are, the Industrial Revolution and capitalist system replaced that medieval feudal system. And here we are, like the greed of the rich is just once again going to be the thing that brings down the American empire. pleonexia, wealth addiction, right? Addiction to wine or to food. You're exhausted. You fill your stomach. You can only indulge so much in those things. But with pleonexia, right, there is no hangover. There's no recharge period, right? It's just a tight spiral of addiction, and it just keeps going. And we have a whole class of people, they'll never be able to spend the amount of money that they have accumulated. Their descendants will never be able to spend it. But they're locked in a competition with other people in their social group to try to have the higher number. And they just can't. They're just addicted, and they're just going to keep absconding with all of our wealth until something dramatically changes. And it's interesting to feel the shift, down in New York City, the political shift down in New York City. That is human nature. People say things like socialism and communism don't take human nature into account. But I'm looking at the capitalist system and be like, this capitalist system pretends that people don't get infected by pleonexia. They're not afflicted by it. They don't get afflicted by pleonexia. Capitalism just pretends that the only ditch is on one side of the road where we overtax people, and there's no ditch on the other side of the road where the wealthy manage to shift the tax burden onto everyone else, creating conditions of intolerable inequality, such as the ones that brought down the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th century AD. So that's what I think about Mr. Tom Bilyeu. Love his commentary. He gave us a lot to talk about in this podcast. But man, did he turn in an unenlightened segment on Mr. Mamdani and his rent control proposal.
Like, I guess I wonder if Tom Bilyeu, does he feel like, if we elected Bernie Sanders as president, would that somehow mark the end of American society?
Well, that would inevitably result in rape and death, Brian.
I guess, that's probably what he'd say. The New York economic ecosystem is going to be this crazily complicated thing. And so if you change something, I think it's pretty hard to predict what the ramifications are through the system. And it is like steering the car between two ditches, like you said. So, adjusting course slightly doesn't necessarily mean you're going into a ditch, but it also...
That's it.
It could mean that as well, though. It's all very complicated.
Well, this seems like a very subtle course correction to say we're just going to freeze the profitability of these units until we can build some more housing. What have it's like it does seem like a fairly reasonable adjustment, right? The problem is that we have a tiny minority absconding with all of our all of our wealth, which really means the right to consume goods and services. The rights of consumption are all going to a tiny minority. Meanwhile, we're all putting in the work. A lot of people in that tiny minority, as mentioned, the mailbox money people, don't work at all. They just live on asset prices. They just, they live by owning a corporation. But whatever the case may be, we desperately need to rebalance the tax burden in this society, and slightly shifting a slight turn of the steering wheel into putting more of the tax burden back on the wealthy, like it was in 1980, is not some. That seems like again, tons of unintended consequences are always possible in every scenario. That's why people who confidently tell you what to expect from the Mamdani administration, we know that they're too overconfident. But it does seem like things like this are just what we need to keep American society going into the future versus collapsing into a crumbling heap of inequality as the Roman Empire did.
Well, I guess without getting into the complicated economics of it all, which are hard to wrap my head around, although I'm sure that Zoran won't single-handedly destroy, this will be, it's just the end of New York, after he gets elected here. I would just never, that used to be a big city, and now it's some desolate place. Unlikely, a graveyard, But, I think on Breaking Points it was, they were talking about, they were covering CNN talking about how, the issue of Israel has become a huge flop, and it used to be, 17 points favorable, and now it's, minus 43 or something, unfavorable, or something like that. There's been a huge swing in the whole Israel issue. And so there's a thing where, the political class doesn't really represent our interests so much as try to cram their interests down our throats, right?
With a fugazi, yes.
And so, Zoran there is, his vice governor is a Jewish guy, but he's not some kind of Zionist shill. And so, I don't know. Like the idea that having someone running on what people are actually interested in is like gonna be the apocalypse. I don't know. Like, I guess I feel like politicians are. Well, they're trying to feed us our interests instead of like it's going the way that it should. I don't know. It's complicated. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
The wealthy ought to be able to send their political representatives to Washington to lobby on their behalf, but we, like the workers, we need to counterbalance that too with our own lobby on our own behalf, so that we hash out some nice middle ground. I mean, we live in a bifurcated society between the owners of property and the workers of jobs, and it's like we got to come to some. It can't just be that the workers get soaked every time. That will destroy your country, and it can't just be that the investors get soaked every time either. That will also destroy your country. So yeah, we need middle ground.
I guess what it is this idea that workers they're like, making a decision that's against their own interests is what Tom Bilyeu is saying by voting for this guy, is offensive.
It's the core of the propaganda.
The whole experience of growing up is to be like, soaked by politicians going back to George Bush, but really like Bill Clinton laid that foundation in the 90s. I just, wasn't aware. It'd be crazy to have a politician that it did not feel like soaked by, basically.
That's too weird.
I'd say probably good on the people of New York. I hope it works out. And it's just hard to imagine that, more of the same is, in fact, what you need, not something different.
I mean, Tom's like, we've got a horrible problem on our hands, but we can't have any solution because you would be ignorant to history if you suggested a solution to the problem. Well, I appreciate Tom being our punching bag today.
I guess I was just gonna say it's just hard to imagine like a voting for a Cuomo. I mean, there's just so many reasons why that seems like a politically toxic idea, and I guess it is reward. I mean, it's a pretty big coup that this establishment shill has been bucked. So hopefully there's more of that in the future coming. I mean, we could have I'd be down with like real libertarians running who aren't like Donald Trump is like not a real libertarian, and this crazy spending bill is like insane. I guess it's being put through and it's going to cut everyone's Medicaid.
You'll be on Donald's desk for signatory this morning.
I'd be totally down to have like real libertarians like running against like real socialists. Like that would be like a great situation for America, right?
Yeah, but you hash out at the middle ground between those two camps, you would presumably get a pretty good society. Sorry, I cut you off.
Well, you just get like these crazy, like corrupt politicians who are just more status quo instead. So I'm totally down for the libertarian side of things if it's legitimate. And hopefully we continue to trend in this direction.
It's great seeing the establishment Democrats taking L's and black eyes. It's like, it's just like crack in my veins. I love it.
It is nice. Yep.
All right. Well, I guess we can leave it there, Brian. This is usually the part of the show where I invite all of our listeners to visit us over at systemfailure.org. If you want to get in touch with either Brian or me, you can accomplish that feat by clicking on our names in the About page. And furthermore, if you'd like to read the weekly essays written by yours truly, you can put your email address in to sign up to receive them in your email inbox every single week. And that way you shan't have to worry about missing any. And finally, you can also visit us now on the newly popping System Failure subreddit. That again is at reddit.com/r/systemfailure. All right, folks, have a beautiful week and happy 4th of July. We'll see you next week.
All right.